proves comedy.
Oh, isn't this fun? Dorothy, you haven't even touched your Mr. Ha-Ha dog.
The Golden Girls, laughter, fame, and silence. For older women, living together under one roof. No husbands. No filters. Just cheesecake, sass, and some of the sharpest one-liners in television history. When The Golden Girls premiered in 1985, no one expected it to survive, let alone redefine what television could be. A sitcom about senior women? In Miami? With menopause jokes and funeral punchlines? And yet, it worked. No, it exploded. Week after week, America tuned in, not just for laughs, but for truth. These weren't just characters. They were icons. They talked about sex, age, grief, love, AIDS, divorce, and did it all while wearing shoulder pads and dishing sarcasm so sharp it could cut steel. Behind the brilliance was a cast that became legend. Bea Arthur, the tall, brooding cynic with a thunderous stare and even deadlier timing. Estelle Getty, a woman in her 60s playing a mother in her 80s, and stealing every scene. Rue McClanahan, a Southern belle who turned shameless flirtation into feminist rebellion. And Betty White, the sweet one. The dim-witted optimist who was always a little too honest, and somehow, the wisest of them all. Together, they made us laugh at the things we were afraid to talk about. They made aging cool. Sexy. Dangerous. And then, one by one, they disappeared. Bea, gone in 2009. Estelle, 2008. Rue, 2010. Betty. 2021, just weeks before turning 100. We remember the show. But we forget the people. The pain. The battles. The lonely exits from a spotlight that once lit the world. What really happened when the cameras stopped? Why did Bea Arthur resent the fame she helped create? How did Estelle Getty suffer in silence, even as she became America's favorite grandma? What dark truths did Rue McClanahan carry behind the eyes of Blanche Devereaux? And why did Betty White outlive them all, only to die alone, right before her greatest celebration? This isn't just a tribute. It's an excavation. We're digging beneath the glitter, the Emmys, the reruns, and finding the heartbreak no one ever aired in primetime. So grab a slice of cheesecake, and stay a while. Because tonight, we remember the Golden Girls. Not just for what they gave us, but for what it cost them. Bea Arthur, the queen of the comeback who hated the applause. Dorothy Zbornak didn't suffer fools. She had zero patience, zero filter, and a glare that could cut through concrete. She was sharp, bitter, dry, and weirdly, impossibly lovable. But the woman who played her, Bea Arthur, was sharper. And colder. And more complicated than any laugh track ever let on. Born Bernice Frankel in 1922, Brooklyn-bred, Bea was never the girl next door. She stood 5 feet 10 inches, spoke with bass baritone conviction, and carried herself like a Broadway general. Before television, she served in the U.S. Marine Corps during World War II, something she rarely discussed, even when directly asked. "It's irrelevant," she once said. That was then. I'm here now. Her rise came slowly. She worked in theater, off-Broadway, and eventually broke out as Maude, first in All in the Family, then her own spin-off. She was a feminist firebrand, tackling abortion, race, and divorce with a stare and a snarl. But The Golden Girls was something else entirely. At 63, when most actresses are pushed out of the industry, Bea Arthur was cast as a divorced, exhausted substitute teacher, living with her mother and 2 equally complicated roommates. She wasn't glam. She wasn't sweet. But Dorothy anchored the chaos. And yet, she never fully embraced the role. Behind the scenes, Bea Arthur was known as cold, distant, even difficult. She didn't like the fame. She didn't enjoy the attention. Most famously, she clashed with Betty White, calling her a fucking phony in interviews. Her reason? She smiled too much. She wanted everyone to like her. Arthur preferred sarcasm to small talk. She didn't party. She didn't play the Hollywood game. Even on set, she often isolated herself from the other women, especially Betty, and only lit up when the cameras rolled. But when they did roll, she was magic. Dorothy was Bea's armor and her weapon. The character allowed her to say everything she couldn't, or wouldn't, in real life. Her wit was lethal. Her timing, unmatched. Her pain, always buried just beneath the sarcasm. When she left the Golden Girls in 1992, it wasn't because the show had run out of gas. It was because she had. She wanted out. Out of the character, out of the box she was put in. She loved acting. She hated celebrity. Her later years were quiet. She returned to the stage. Did guest roles. Donated to LGBTQ+ causes. But she mostly disappeared from the public eye. In 2009, Bea Arthur died of cancer at age 86. No long goodbye. No dramatic farewell. Just a headline, a few tributes, and silence. Her ashes were scattered quietly. Just as she would have wanted. Because Bea didn't crave adoration. She never needed applause. She only wanted one thing. To be heard. Then left alone. And maybe, just maybe, that's what made her unforgettable. Estelle Getty, the youngest Golden Girl, trapped in the oldest role. Sophia Petrillo was a firecracker, 80-something years old, with a purse full of insults and a past full of Sicily. She was the show's wild card. She was the scene stealer. She was everybody's grandma. But the woman behind the character, Estelle Getty, was none of those things. And by the time the world fell in love with her, she was already falling apart inside. Born Estelle Schurz in 1923, in New York City, she spent most of her early career struggling. She wasn't tall enough. Pretty enough. Young enough. Fresh enough. Casting directors said no, again and again. So she worked in secretarial jobs, off Broadway, community theater. She raised a family while chasing a dream everyone told her was already dead. And then came Torch Song Trilogy, a hit Broadway show where she finally broke through in her late 50s. A few years later, she auditioned for the Golden Girls. They said she was too young. So what did she do? She slapped on prosthetic cheeks, white powder, and a wig. She walked into the audition, and walked out with a job that would change her life, and destroy her health. Here's the truth no one likes to admit. Estelle Getty never felt safe on that set. She wasn't a trained TV actress. She had no sitcom background. She was nervous, constantly. She forgot lines. She panicked before tapings. According to cast and crew, Bea Arthur, despite playing her daughter, was cold and distant to her off-screen, seeing her as unprofessional and unprepared. But Getty worked. She rehearsed endlessly. Stayed late. Took notes. And when the red light came on, she delivered. Sophia became iconic. Getty won an Emmy in 1988. She starred in spin-offs. Movies. Interviews. America couldn't get enough. But behind the applause, something was wrong. As early as the mid-90s, Getty began forgetting things. Losing focus. Slipping. At first, people blamed age or anxiety. But it wasn't nerves. It was dementia. Specifically, Lewy body dementia, one of the most aggressive, misunderstood forms of neurological disease. She spent the last 8 years of her life virtually unable to communicate. She didn't recognize friends. She didn't recognize fans. She didn't even recognize herself. She died in 2008, at age 84, just 3 days before her 85th birthday. And the saddest part? The world that had once adored her, had mostly forgotten her. There were tributes, sure. Headlines. A few montages. But no one really talked about the irony. The woman who gave the Golden Girls its voice was silenced far too soon. Estelle Getty didn't live like Sophia. She didn't go out cracking jokes or slinging zingers. She went out slowly. Quietly. Alone. And that, perhaps, is the cruelest twist of all. Rue McClanahan, the sex symbol who got typecast by her own power. Blanche Devereaux wasn't just flirty. She was fearless. A Southern belle with high heels, higher standards, and a bedroom more active than most primetime schedules could handle. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't subtle. And she made being sexy over 50 not just acceptable, but iconic. But Rue McClanahan? She was something else entirely. And underneath the lipstick and lingerie, was a woman caught in a strange kind of trap. Born Rue McClanahan in 1934 in Oklahoma, she was raised Baptist and dreamed of becoming a serious stage actress. She studied German and theater at the University of Tulsa. Her roots were conservative, her instincts, rebellious. She built her career slowly. Maude gave her her first real break, opposite Bea Arthur, and she played a string of quirky, overly eager women. But it wasn't until the Golden Girls that she found her full voice, and her curse. Because Rue wasn't Blanche. Not really. She once said in an interview, "People think I sleep around. I don't. Blanche does. I have morals." But the world didn't care. Audiences blurred the line. Men propositioned her in public. Women whispered behind her back. And Hollywood? It never offered her anything beyond the sexbot grandma role again. The irony? She wasn't that confident. In private, Rue struggled with self-esteem, body image, and a string of broken marriages, 6, to be exact. She joked about them in public, but the cracks ran deep. She battled health issues, including breast cancer and a minor stroke, years before her death. She also battled regret, about being typecast, about how Hollywood devalues older women, and how even the freedom Blanche represented came with a cost. And yet, Rue leaned in. She wrote a memoir, My First 5 Husbands, and the Ones Who Got Away, a brutally honest, funny, and often heartbreaking book. She spoke openly about sex, aging, and her love of animals and activism. She lived big, laughed loud, and worked until the end. But the end came too fast. In 2010, at age 76, Rue died after suffering a massive brain hemorrhage. No warning. No long decline. Just gone. And with her went something the Golden Girls had only scratched the surface of, the idea that being older, being sexual, being seen, wasn't shameful. It was revolutionary. Rue McClanahan didn't play Blanche. She weaponized her. And in doing so, she helped redefine what womanhood could look like, after 40, after marriage, after everyone else had stopped watching. She burned bright. And when she went, it felt like someone had turned the lights down in that Miami kitchen. Betty White, the last Golden Girl, gone just before the applause. When people talk about Betty White, they talk about light. The smile. The voice. The warmth. The way she could make innuendo sound innocent, or innocence sound filthy. She wasn't just loved. She was adored. She made it cool to grow old, and cooler to do it with jokes. But here's what most people forget. Betty White wasn't sweet. She was sharp. She was steel wrapped in lace. And she worked harder than anyone else in the room, for longer than anyone thought possible. Born January 17, 1922, in Oak Park, Illinois, Betty White started in television before most Americans owned a television. She was one of the first women to produce her own sitcom, Life with Elizabeth in the 1950s, long before words like showrunner or trailblazer were handed out on Twitter. When the Golden Girls came along, Betty was already a legend. Originally cast as Blanche, she switched to Rose because Rue McClanahan wanted to stretch herself. And it was the perfect accident. Rose Nyland, sweet, spacey, endlessly optimistic, became an icon. Her street Olaf stories. Her naive questions. Her wide-eyed confusion in a house full of sarcasm and cynicism, she was the heart of the group. But don't mistake the character for the woman. Betty White was nothing like Rose. She was witty, politically savvy, unapologetically outspoken. She fought for animal rights, LGBTQ+ causes, and women's equality before it was trendy. She sparred with network executives, held her ground, and never once apologized for being old and relevant. After the Golden Girls, she didn't fade, she evolved. She conquered game shows. She won an Emmy for the John Larroquette Show. She stole scenes in The Proposal. And when most actresses her age were gone from screen entirely, Betty White hosted Saturday Night Live, at age 88. The internet made her immortal. Memes. Twitter. Viral clips. A Super Bowl ad. Betty White was suddenly cool again. To Gen Z, to millennials, to everyone. She was invincible. Until she wasn't. In late 2021, the world was preparing for her 100th birthday. Magazines were printed. Documentaries edited. Tributes scheduled. She was days away from becoming a centenarian, a living symbol of Hollywood's resilience. Then, quietly, on December 31, 2021, Betty White died in her sleep. The world found out the next morning. And it didn't feel real. Not because she was famous. But because she had become something beyond fame. A constant. The woman who'd been here since television's beginning. Left just before the world could celebrate her longevity. And maybe, just maybe, that was her final punchline. Betty White didn't need the party. She was the reason we were all celebrating in the first place. She outlived them all. But she never stood alone. She carried them with her, Bea, Rue, Estelle. Every time she told a joke, dropped a double entendre, or winked at the absurdity of growing old in a world obsessed with youth. And now, they're all together again. Maybe sitting around that worn-out kitchen table in Miami. Arguing. Laughing. Passing cheesecake. The girls are gone, but the glow remains. They weren't supposed to make history. They were four older women, in a pastel-colored kitchen, talking about dating, funerals, menopause, and cheesecake. No explosions. No sexy 20-somethings. No high-budget sets. Just 4 chairs. 4 voices. And 4 women who changed everything. Bea Arthur brought fire. She never needed your applause, but she earned your respect with every deadpan glare. Estelle Getty made the world laugh, while quietly losing herself behind the scenes. Rue McClanahan turned shameless flirtation into feminist rebellion, and paid the price for being too bold, too early. Betty White lasted the longest, a century of smiles and subversion, and left just before the world could throw her the biggest party of all. They weren't just golden. They were raw. Flawed. Complex. Real. And that's why they mattered. Because in a world that discards older women, they demanded to be seen. They didn't apologize for wrinkles, or for wanting sex, or for making mistakes. They showed us that friendship can outlive husbands, and that chosen family might be the only kind that really lasts. And now, they're gone. No more reunions. No more interviews. No more late-night reruns that end with a wink and a hug. Just memory. But maybe that's the real magic of the Golden Girls. They weren't frozen in time. They were timeless. And when you watch them now, even decades later, they still feel right here. Still funny. Still fearless. Still alive. So if you've made it this far, do what they would have done. Pour a cup of coffee. Cut a slice of cheesecake. And call someone you love. Because friendship doesn't last forever. But stories like this, they echo. They linger. They glow. To Dorothy. To Sophia. To Blanche. To Rose. The girls are gone. But the glow remains.